Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Woodrow Wilson Center. My name is Jeff DeBelco. I want to welcome you today for what promises to be a very exciting event entitled UNEP Post-Conflict Assessments, a new tool in improving the environment in post-conflict countries. War can obviously devastate the environment, leaving a toxic legacy that threatens survival even after the fighting ends. Deforested land, polluted water, certainly poisonous weapons and other environmental problems can really prevent a nation from recovering from conflict and its citizens from rebuilding healthy, sustainable lives. Since 2001, the United Nations Environment Programme's Post-Conflict Assessment Unit has been investigating some of the world's most war-torn environments: Afghanistan, Liberia, the occupied Palestinian territories, Iraq, Bosnia, Kosovo, Albania, Serbia, Macedonia, a long list. Today, we are very fortunate to have Pekka Haavisto, who's the chairman of UNEP's Post-Conflict Assessment Unit, to discuss how UNEP, with its partners, integrate environmental issues into recovery and rehabilitation to promote cooperation, good governance, and sustainable development in the aftermath of war. We are very pleased to host Pekka today and thankful to the Heinrich Böll Foundation that has brought Pekka to town this week for their conference tomorrow on the origins of green parties. A word about the Wilson Center for those of you who might be new here at the center. We are founded in 1968 by Act of Congress as a nonpartisan, non-advocacy institute to try to bridge the worlds of scholarship and policy, much as President Wilson did in his career as president of Princeton University and president of the United States. The Environmental Change and Security Project is a 10-year-old project where we are, again, trying to bridge these worlds of research and policy in the areas of environment, population, and security issues. We're co-sponsoring today's events with my colleagues in the Conflict Prevention Program, Anita Sharma, the director of that program. We're very pleased to be doing that. Also like to say, as usual, thanks to USAID's Office of Population and Reproductive Health that supports the work of ECSP, and we're pleased now to be working closely with some of Pekka's colleagues in UNEP in the Division of Early Warning and Assessment on related environment and security issues. As I mentioned, Pekka is now the chairman of UNEP's Post-Conflict Assessment Unit. He's the former Finnish Minister of Environment and Development Cooperation, was a member of the Finnish Parliament from 1987 to 1995, and he's now spokesperson for the European Green Party and one of the co-founders of the Green Party of Finland. So Pekka, please. The floor is yours. Welcome to the Wilson Center.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff, and for these nice welcoming words. And it's good to be here. Thank you for Woodrow Wilson Center for the invitation, and also for Heinrich Böll Center actually for the original reason why I came to Washington and had the opportunity to have several meetings here during this week. And the story I'm going to tell you now is the story about UNEP's post-conflict activities. I will take you a little bit around the world because we are really hands-on in several parts of the world currently in the post-conflict situations. But I also try to look this from the angle of creating something new for the post-conflict societies, some help to the environment, some help to the people living in those countries, but also looking, so to say, from the political angle, can this kind of environmental diplomacy create something new in this world, and is this maybe the way to go on in some of these conflict areas? By the way, I also learned that this will be a direct sending in the internet, so I welcome everyone who is at the home maybe more comfortable looking this from the internet. So I will give you some background information on our activities, then about our Balkans task force, our work on depleted uranium, Afghanistan, occupied Palestinian territories, Iraq, Liberia, then some conclusions, lessons learned. And of course, as a background, we all know that the military conflict always implies human suffering. These are the typical pictures of the war we see all over again. But it's not so much discussed that also the environmental damage in a post-conflict situations can be very serious. Actually, of course, we have seen the pictures from the 91 burning of the oil wells after the occupation of Kuwait by the Iraqis, and all this damage done. But the consciousness of these environmental consequences has been raising only, I would say, in the recent years in a more effective way. UNEP has been doing, so United Nations Environment Programme has been doing some work already after the Gulf War. Actually, these 3 separate reports from Kuwait, from Saudi Arabia, from Iraq, but these didn't include any field visits or field work that time, and of course they were more, so to say, academic from the nature. And our post-conflict assessment unit has then, starting from the Kosovo conflict, 1999, been producing reports from the Kosovo, from Macedonia, Albania, actually Serbia, Montenegro, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and then we also have been concentrating on a topic of depleted uranium. I would say, actually, if I'm very honest, maybe the only UN agency who had the courage to enter to this field when we were requested by the authorities in Kosovo, in Serbia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, they were concerned. There were a huge concern among the citizens on this topic, and we decided to make field work and field investments on this. I will tell about that a little bit later. And then we were thinking that we were only created as a Balkans task force, but unfortunately for the reason that there are conflicts also in other parts of the world, we were invited to work in the occupied Palestinian territories, in Afghanistan, recently in Iraq, and actually our newest activities are in Liberia and in Haiti. The objectives of the work: we are of course trying to enter immediately to investigate the environmental impacts of the conflicts. We try to collect all the information available, but this information usually also includes the chronic part of the environmental problems. When you go to the post-conflict country, you look at the pollution of the Danube, for example, after the Kosovo War, maybe 5 or 10% was caused by the conflict. 90%, 95% is due to the previous pollution, just from the ordinary times, so to say. But when you are there, when you measure, when you propose cleanup activities, you cannot isolate the part that, okay, let's clean the part what was polluted during the war. You have to go deep to the pollution history and chronic environmental issues. We also are saying that environment is not only butterflies and birds. It's something where people live in. It's water, it's human health, its livelihoods, its agriculture, all those issues actually people are very dependent on in a post-conflict societies. I know that in my country and in my parliament, usually in the environmental debate is that, well, you know, these people in the post-conflict countries or in the developing countries, they don't care about the environment because they have so many other things to do. And actually now I know the right answer to them. Yes, they care about the environment because they live on it. They need their drinking water, they need their agricultural fields, they need their forests, and so on. We are trying to make as rapid technical assistance for the governments in this post-conflict situation, but we also try to promote regional or transboundary environmental management. For example, common river basin management is very important in these circumstances. We know so many places in the world where the people living in the upstream are using all the water, and then there is drought and problems with the water at the downstream. And this is a very typical situation also in the post-conflict situations. We need to strengthen the capacity of the governments and the environmental authorities, but also work with the regions in those cases. We try to push the donors to be more active on the environmental sector. And of course, what is very challenging, trying to integrate the environment in the whole reconstruction process in these countries. When I'm saying that we come from UN and we try to be rapid, everybody is a little bit smiling because they think that UN is a big bureaucracy and you never can be rapid. We can be in, let's say, in 4 days or in 1 week's time in a region where we are invited. And in the UN scale, that's quite rapid usually. We use international experts. We don't have staff in our office just waiting for new conflicts. We have a very small core group of people. When needed, we call to the governments, to the government agencies, to the international institutions, independent institutions, ask, do you have this type of person? We need that expertise now in our field work. We are working with other UN agencies, of course. We are trying to publish our reports in an easy reading format. Somebody said that these are coffee table reports on environment. We were bringing some of those with us that you can find from the corridor. We try to make not a scientific report, or at least a report that looks as a scientific report, which is very difficult to read for people who are interested in environment but not so much interested in environmental sciences or others. So we try to keep the methodological part just in the end of the report and trying to explain what are the real consequences of the situation, how to interpret the results. We try to translate these to local languages. This has been published in Pashto, Dari, Arabic, so on. And our audience, of course, are local communities, host governments, international community, and non-governmental organizations. When we can then intervene in a situation, we have found out that when UNEP is needed is when there is a lack of resources or expertise to respond to post-conflict environmental risks, or when there are potential conflict-related transboundary issues which are very difficult to handle in a post-conflict situation between maybe hostile governments and so on. or when there is a need of independent assessment to verify findings of national authorities. We have several cases where environment or environmental information is used as a weapon in the war, so to say, that somebody is exaggerating the environmental damage in the media, saying that this is a total catastrophe. Other side may be saying, well, nothing happened actually. And then you have to come there as an independent researcher to look what really happened. We have some preconditions, of course. We have to have an invitation. Somebody asked me why you are not in Grozny, in Chechnya. I said, we are from the UN. UN is based on the governments. Whenever the government responsible of that area is inviting us, we are always available. We are doing our work independently. We were asked from the previous Iraq government, so the Saddam Hussein regime, to come to the country, look the consequences of use of depleted uranium, others. We said, okay, we come, but with the same conditions as in any other parts of the world. We make the sampling, we choose the sites, we choose the scientists, and we pick the samples back to our international laboratories, and we publish independently our reports. But that didn't please the earlier regime. We need to have access of information, we need to have basic security in place, we don't want to put our scientists to work on the minefields, we need the stakeholder support, we need, of course, financial support. So one part of our activities is fundraising for post-conflict environmental issues. I mentioned, and I don't go so much detailed in these, I mentioned that we have always the conflict-related impacts, bombing of industrial facilities, damage to the urban environment, damage to the biodiversity sites, different types of weapon use, refugee flows, so on. But we always have the chronic environmental problems as well there. And we have the challenges to have a proper environmental governance in place. Let's say in Afghanistan, very typical situation when we went there, just when the Karzai regime started its work, we asked, okay, where is the environmental ministry? Nobody knew. There wasn't any environmental ministry. Which ministry is taking care of the environment? That was a little bit unclear. Where are the archives? Nowhere. Where are the maps if you have some protected area or some environment? Nobody knew. So you just start from the scratch in these post-conflict situations. We have a lot of different stakeholders. Of course, we have the UN, different vehicles that are used in a post-conflict situation, the humanitarian vehicle, so to say, the reconstruction vehicle. We are part of the UN flash appeals, humanitarian appeals. But we also work not only with the UN agencies, but with the NGOs. And we have found that NGOs are very good partners. They can even send us good scientists sometimes. Even Greenpeace, WWF, Conservation International, Fauna and Flora International, all these have been excellent sources of information and in some cases have been part of our missions. We do our work, of course, by collecting information. We use the remote sensing analysis. Actually, NASA has been quite important partner to us to give the satellite pictures in some of these cases. We make the site inspections, interviews, we make the sampling, and then finally we have usually this kind of scientific panel which then puts the reports together and make the final conclusions. I said we have some constraints. Security, landmines are always risky, and we have been working in many of these sites where these problems still exist. Of course, financing is always a question. Are there enough funds to do this kind of environmental work? To finding the local expertise, as I mentioned, governments have sometimes collapsed. All these other issues, even the political considerations, can be constraints. When we entered to Serbia, it was still Milosevic Serbia, so you can imagine we had a quite tough route to start to work with the Milosevic government because they had environmental emergencies, but there were many governments who think that we are too early. This is not the moment to do something for the environment. We were thinking that, well, this should be looked as a humanitarian activity. Whoever is in power, you should act now to help the local people there. If you make these 5 phases, in the preparatory phases, we collect the material, we make desk studies, political institutional cooperation, recruiting the experts, having the stakeholder meetings, then the field work, fact-finding missions, technical missions, sampling. Then comes the analytical phase with the laboratories. It can take quite a lot of time if you have 300 samples and you really want to make proper analysis in the laboratories. It can take 2 months before your laboratory results are ready. Then comes the reporting phase, and then follow-up, which for us is very important because we don't want to be an agency that is just putting out reports and, nobody is reading them, nothing is happening after those. We always try then to make the round among the donor community, among the stakeholders, saying what are the next steps that should be taken, and we try to follow up. I will then show you a couple of examples how the follow-up has been done. Balkan it's good to talk about it because it has been, there is a beginning and there is an end. I was just 2 weeks ago in Belgrade where we closed finally our activities and our small office in Belgrade. You remember these pictures after 1999, Kosovo war, burning oil refineries, burning industrial facilities, burning oil depots and so on, and especially some of the neighboring countries, Bulgaria, Romania, reacting very fiercely on the pollution of the Danube. The Turkish fishermen were saying that there are oil leakages or in the Black Sea and so on. I remember, I think President Yeltsin that time said that this is more environmental damage has been done than in the Chernobyl accident by this war and so on. So there was huge political claims as well in the air. We did our work first in Kosovo, Serbia, Montenegro during summer 1999, then continued to Albania, Macedonia, which had claims on the impacts of the refugees to these countries, then continued between 2000 and 2002 with the depleted uranium missions, and then our cleanup activities actually closed only this year. These are just the pictures how the post-conflict situation looks like when you enter to these facilities. These are pictures from Pančevo, which was one of those most targeted sites. We had 2 movable laboratories, one from Denmark, one from Germany with us. There were leakages of different kind of chemicals, I think 60 chemicals. This is mercury contamination on the ground. And we had, of course, the protective clothing and so on for our scientists. When you make these samples from the sediments of the Danube, first of all, I don't recommend to put scientists from 5 different countries in the same boat to decide how to make the samples of water or sediments. I'm not an environmental scientist, but I learned out that it's very difficult to decide how to harmonize, these practices. Every laboratory have their own way to do it, but finally we did it. These were the targeted oil facilities. Actually, what the Serbs had been doing was quite clever action prior to the bombings, that they have been moving and they have been emptying some of these depots, moving the chemicals away and really trying actively to protect their people in some of these locations. So they were not always full and so on. Some targeted ammonium storage stores and so on. And some also transformer stations. It's a very typical issue that Kosovo area, Serbia, was a little bit like this laboratory of modern weapons, and one of these, so to say, soft weapons is this kind of fiber weapons which is dropped over the electricity lines to have the shortcuts of electricity. And it was looked as a very clean weapon because it's not burning anything or it's not exploding anywhere or so on. But you can cause, with the shortcut, you can cause a burn in a transformer station. And when unfortunately, these transformer stations in the Balkans had this oil with the PCB, and when that is burning, you actually create this dioxide problem. You had a lot of pollution just even from very clean weapons. Zastava car factory was one of those which was damaged and a lot of chemicals leaked there. And even some collateral damage in the nature protection areas. One reason why these areas were targeted was that some military equipment were there, so you can always ask who made the biggest mistake, those one who were bringing the military equipment in the middle of protected areas, or then those who targeted it, but anyhow the conclusions were sad for the nature. And then the refugee camp issue. In Macedonia, they wanted to control very much the refugee camps, where to put them, and of course they didn't want to have this ethnic balance of Macedonia to have any impact by coming Kosovars. So these were closed and isolated areas. Unfortunately, some of these camps were put in the area which was the groundwater area for Skopje, the capital. So the result of these camps were that the colibacteria in the drinking water of Skopje started to increase. And of course then people's attitudes towards the refugees even come maybe more hostile when you have this kind of news that, oh, these people are even polluting our environment. So actually you really have to take care of this type of issues. And some camps in Albania, anyhow in Albania, because they are ethnically, of course, Kosovo Albanians, they were mostly living in the homes and houses, so so much these problems with the refugee camps. What were our findings then? In Serbia, actually we defined that they have 4 serious hotspots, what we call environmental hotspots, polluted, targeted areas, Novi Sad, Pančevo, Bor, Kragujevac, and that the immediate cleanup activities should start there. So we went to the donor community, we raised $12 million, and we started this kind of cleanup activities, both in Pančevo, in Kragujevac, in Novi Sad, where, for example, in Novi Sad, maybe the only in the world this kind of hydraulic barrier construction to protect the groundwater is now established. We are quite proud of that, because it's the other alternative would have been the huge mass of polluted soil that would have been cleaned, and this was the most rapid way and technologically very advanced way to protect the groundwater sources for the population. Some areas then in Albania, Macedonia, we looked actually when we were invited to the countries. Of course, first we went to the refugee camps, but then the government said, well, actually, we have these chronic environmental problems, which are even more serious. Could you, at the same time, visit those? So we went to the industrial facilities, we went to the dump sites, we went all over and recommended some projects for the donors to be taken also from these countries. One issue what has been most complicated for us also politically is the issue of depleted uranium. The reason maybe was that for 1 year, starting from 1999 to the summer 2000, we didn't get the proper information if it has been used and where it has been used. We had a lot of rumors. And the worst thing, of course, was that first the Kosovars themselves had a lot of rumors. They said in every place where we visited, you have to measure the radioactivity here. This is certainly polluted. And we were a little bit hesitant. We said, well, you know, we don't think that the radioactivity, it's of course very low level radioactivity, but secondly, it's not certainly maybe your biggest problem here and so on. But these rumors came back and back to us. And then they start to accuse that United Nations is doing nothing for this problem. And then came the next wave, which was the peacekeepers. You remember maybe that the Italian peacekeepers started to say that they have a lot of leukemia cases among the peacekeepers, and the reason has to be the depleted uranium. And then the pressure came so big that the coordinates and information was released, and we were asked to do the study at some of these sites in Kosovo. We started at autumn 2000 and then continued to Serbia, Montenegro, and finally to Bosnia-Herzegovina, where depleted uranium was used much more earlier, 94, 95. These are the maps, as you see, mostly in the southwestern parts of the country. The depleted uranium has been used, so we visited mainly and worked mainly with the Italian and German KFOR troops which were guarding these areas. These are actually Turkish mine clearance people. This is just showing how close with the military expertise you have to work when you are working with this type of topics, because these same areas were targeted with the other kinds of weapons. There were unexploded ordnance and also mines at some of these areas. So the military expertise, which we certainly didn't have in UNEP, we had to link ourselves to the KFOR, and we also had very good experts, actually Lieutenant Colonel Mark Melanson from the US Army with us during all these missions. Of course, to stress how politically independent or politically balanced we have to be, Russians got very interested when we told that there is a DU assessment, so we got also a Russian scientist, and he was also a very good one. So it was sometimes we heard a very interesting debates then between those two on the use of these issues. We were measuring beta gamma radiation, as you see, really our hands in the soil. We were picking the loose penetrators. As you know, when they go refugees, you can find them on the ground. Of course, in the post-conflict situations, you always see the most stupid behavior of the people. First of all, they collect all trash what they found, the war trash, and they put them in the bookshelves or under the bed, or they make ordnance out of that. We have even seen a depleted uranium ordnance, so somebody is hanging the radioactive thing just here, you know, and children are playing with these and all these things. And so we immediately recommend it, even if it's very low radioactive risk, that immediately clean up wherever it can be done properly. This is this is as close as I have got to the military life, because we were living 2 weeks in the Italian barracks. I have to say that the wine was very good there. And then in I think 1 week in the German barracks, it was more disciplined. but it was good experience, and actually we found that the soldiers were a very good audience for us. They were very, very interested in what kind of circumstances they are working and living in these peacekeeping operations. And this is our experience from all parts of the world, actually. They are looking at that from their own safety point of view. So what were our findings? Ground surface, there is no widespread depleted uranium pollution. It's very limited. The areas are usually 200 to 200 meters where you can find low-level radioactivity. In the soil, you can find in the laboratory analysis low-level contamination. In vegetation and milk, no contamination. In groundwater, yes. You can find at some locations where a lot of ammunition has been used, some impacts to the groundwater. In the air, you can find some particles in the air. Transuranic elements, you find low level. Future risks, we think that the groundwater contamination from penetrative corrosion is a risk in some of these locations, but that risk can be handled if it's done properly, and if the cleanup has been done properly. Of course, then there's always been the issue, but what about the Gulf region? We have been working in the Gulf with the same topic actually in 2002 with the International Atomic Energy Agency in Kuwait. The report has been published by the IAEA, and now we are working quite closely with the UK military on the issues of Basra and southern Iraq, which is related both to 91 conflict and to the recent conflict. But that was our depleted uranium story, and I could, if speaking about the environmental diplomacy, I could tell much more about it, because I have to say that it wasn't easy to handle, and it has so many political connections to many directions. Something then about our other activities, and this is just to go those very briefly. As mentioned, we were in Afghanistan among the first UN agencies in spring 2002. There were no proper environmental administration, but now they have it. They have actually Minister Nuristani, whose family is in San Diego still. He's very experienced professor, returned back to Kabul, and he is now responsible for the water resources and environment. We have our offices now in his ministry. Our key sectors in Afghanistan assessment: urban environment, biodiversity, protected areas, forest, woodlands, water and wetlands, backhand corridor, which is this hand there in the northeastern province of Afghanistan. During our work, we couldn't visit all the sites in Afghanistan due to the security constraints. So war was still ongoing, Taliban troops still in some of these areas, so we had to almost on daily basis to reroute our activities, decide whether we today will fly there or no, and so on and so on. We also try to visit some of these existing and proposed protected areas I mentioned. When we asked from Kabul, do you have protected areas? They said, well, we don't actually know. It's better if you ask from the provinces. We asked, do you have anybody working there? We don't know. Better if you ask locally. So when we visited locally, we might find people who are working there. We asked, who is paying your salary? It's usually the local governorate, then who's paying the salary. Kabul doesn't know anything about that. So before speaking about the decentralization in the governance, you first have to speak about the centralization, that at least the capital knows if some people are working on these topics. I think this still remains a challenge in Afghanistan. There is not, the central government doesn't yet have the control and information over the whole country. As you know, Afghanistan was some kind of Eden for hippie tourists during the 60s and 70s, and when you saw some of these sceneries, you understand why, because it's a lovely country. by nature. These were the views, you know, when you were driving some of these quite bad roads of Afghanistan. Bande Amir. This could be from the tourist brochure, I think. Oh. And then, of course, they have some threatened species. We look these issues. It's a land very rich on the biodiversity. We look the endangered species, their conditions. One of those was snow leopard, which is living in the northern part of the country, very rare species. And you find the skins of the snow leopard at this famous chicken street market in Kabul. One of the recommendations, of course, in our report to the peacekeepers, to the international staff, to the international audiences, don't buy these. This is actually putting this snow leopard to a real danger. And I think we have got this message quite well through in Kabul and in Afghanistan. We used also, as mentioned, this satellite analysis issue where you can see usually the water, vegetation, forest cover issues. Here you see from 1976 to 87, then 98 and 2001, how the Sistan Basin wetland between Afghanistan and Iran has been disappearing. This is what is left. 99% of the wetlands has dried out. Very similar with the Kholek Hasmat Khan wetland. We use this repeat photography, old photographs, new photographs from the area. Or the deforestation issues, a lot of illegal logging, trade and timber trade over the Pakistani border, then to the Arab countries, and a lot of problems, erosion has been caused by these illegal logging activities. In Baghdis province, the green is forest, 1977, almost nothing left, 2002. These have also been the way to finance the war by different troops. Similar picture from Nuristan, Kunar, Nangarhar provinces, 1977 compared to 2002. So certainly the reforestation programs are needed. 52% loss after 1977. Well, you see then the urban sites, Kabul, asbestos dump site in the middle of the town, or hospital waste in Kandahar, which is thrown out from the window of the hospital. And some of our experts said that these hospitals are making more sick people than healing them with this kind of management of waste. This was not the worst scene we saw there. Children working in a plastic recycling factory. Environmentalists are always speaking good things about the recycling, but you shouldn't work in this kind of working conditions with very, very hazardous chemicals around, and which was the worst thing, these 8 to 12 years old children were not only working there, they were sleeping there, so they were almost 24 hours in these chemical fumes in Mazar-i-Sharif. And similar, again, recycling of used car batteries without any protection, without any proper handling of materials. Afghanistan is concerned about its natural resources. Actually, now the national budget gives 9% for the protection of natural resources. We have been raising funds, mainly from the European Union, 4.5 million US dollars for capacity building, for the ministry, putting up a proper environmental administration, and with the Asian Development Bank, we are now working very closely on the environmental sector. We have an office in the ministry, and we are working with other UN agencies on key environmental issues like the reforestation projects. Then I come even to more difficult topics. Palestine. We have been working there since 2001, 2002. We got a mandate from the UNEP Governing Council to look the consequences of the occupation in the occupied Palestinian territories. But this was an exceptional situation in the Governing Council because this resolution was supported by Israel. And that was maybe the time when also Israel wanted to find the ways to support the cooperation and have maybe more active role for the UN agencies. So we got a very interesting mandate. And I have to say that the US played had a very important role to facilitate this to happen in the beginning. So our mandate was also based on the fact that we were working both with the Palestinian Authority and the government of Israel. So whenever I go to the region, I go to the Gaza, West Bank, but also to Tel Aviv, Jerusalem, to meet also the Israeli counterparts. And this has been our track all the time. In the Gaza city, of course, you have the urban environmental issues. Actually, it's very urban, surprisingly urban area. I didn't take the pictures of the Gaza beach, but you know, if this were not area in a conflict, it would be one of the loveliest Mediterranean coastlines, one of the loveliest and most crowded. It's amazingly nice area. Of course, to this area then comes totally untreated wastewater from many sources, or the groundwater is polluted by agrochemicals or leakages from dump sites in Gaza Strip. One of the main issues, and our message to the Palestinians were, you are always fighting about the groundwater, speaking about the quantity, but you never mention the quality. But you are, with your own activities, you are now putting in danger the quality of the groundwater. So what's the use of fighting over the liters of the water if you cannot guarantee that it can be used in the future? So why don't you put your acts together also to protect your own groundwater resources? Or this kind of open burning of waste, this type in the West Bank area. Again, this is when you burn this kind of unseparated waste, you get a lot of different hazardous substances, dioxins, furans, others, which are then having effects to the groundwater. Or a dump site in Jenin, which was in the middle of habitation, middle of area where people were living. Of course, we looked issues then like the separation wall, security wall. There's two names. Which type of negative environmental consequences that has? Of course, it's isolating also people from their wells, people from their agricultural land. It's also putting cutting the biodiversity channels and so on and so on. Or the new settlements, for the security reasons, they are usually put on the top of the hills, on the vulnerable hilltops, and of course it's not, if you in the normal circumstances would plan a sustainable planning and building, you wouldn't do it like that. We put all together 136 recommendations, and what was interesting, we got both Palestinians and Israelis to agree on these recommendations. I have to say that it took quite a lot of time, energy, and quite a lot of diplomacy. They didn't want that time to come to the same room, so it was us who were pendling from other room and back forth. But finally, they agreed on these recommendations. And our goal actually has been to work with the both sides, trying to get them at the same table to speak over these issues. This is Minister Abu Safiev, the Palestinian environmental head of the Palestinian Environmental Authority. We last time had him and his delegation in Amman in December for the capacity building purposes, because he said that before they come to meet the Israelis, they have to be learned how to have environmental negotiations, that they don't have skills. They always feel that Israelis are so much better in this kind of issues. They have to know the basics, how to do it. So now at least we have done that capacity building for them. But the political will, of course, has to be there. What we are trying to do is to re-establish the Israel-Palestine Joint Environmental Expert Committee. We had these people sitting together actually last summer for 3 days in Geneva in a closed room where we had both Israeli and Palestinian delegations on these discussions, but we are not yet there that this Joint Environmental Expert Committee could rejoin. We have been identifying also projects for rapid implementation. We want to use the environment as a part of the confidence peace-building tool in the region. Of course, it's not only then Israel and Palestine, it's Jordan, Egypt, hopefully Syria, and so on in the region that should be part of this kind of work. We try to strengthen the Palestinian environmental authorities, increase the environmental awareness in the region. And then, Mr. Chairman, I have 2 countries left and then the conclusions. Iraq. UNEP started Iraq activities actually quite early. I mentioned there was some desk studies done already in 1991. Then the Mesopotamia Mars study was published 2001. In UNEP Global Environmental Outlook reports, always the issue of the Mesopotamian marshes was addressed. As I said, when you go to this type of country, and we worked there last summer quite intensively in Baghdad, in Basra, then we had to withdraw. I was helmet on and bulletproof leaves when I left the country because there was a little bit unrest in Basra those days, and we haven't yet been able to return. But what we know is that all these issues with the earlier pollution, hazardous waste, these water resources, air pollution issues, all these are there. You can compare this, I would say, to the Central and Eastern European countries quite a lot, this kind of old chronic environmental problems. And then you have the several conflict-related issues. Actually, the Iran-Iraq war was never cleaned up. It's when you visit some of these Kurd areas, some of these villages, even the use of chemical weapons during that war, which has been proved, nobody really looked after what are the real consequences. Then the Gulf War, bombing of industrial facilities, all different pollution issues, and then the latest Iraq war. And my feeling is that the biggest damage was done by the looting to the environment. Surprisingly many industrial facilities were put on fire, a lot of chemical leakages, a lot of burning chemicals due to the looting. When we were there in August, there was still smoke coming on from many factories, and you start to think, well, the war ended in 4 months ago, 3-4 months ago, and this is still ongoing. So it was a surprisingly bad thing for the country. What we recommended in our work, of course, that there has to be a proper assessment and identifying priorities, relieving immediately the environmental threats for the people, integrating environment to the post-conflict reconstruction process, create a good knowledge base on the environment. Iraqis have good environmental scientists and good engineers, but they are lacking at least 10 years now, lacking behind. They don't have the information or the education what is in the Western countries. So they need a lot of capacity building at this stage. And of course, you have to build a proper administration countrywide. Now they have established an environmental ministry, and Minister Sadiq Karim, who is a Kurd by himself, is our good partner. He has been visiting us several times, as well as some other ministers, like the Minister for Water Resources. I just show a little bit the typical work we have been doing. We have been putting a database of more than 300 polluted sites or damaged sites in Iraq. It's on our database in Geneva and fully shared with the Iraqi administration. These are the type of the places: Al-Misraq Sulfur State Company, which has had a serious burn, and a sulfur cloud which was released there last June. Midland, a refinery company which was looted and there was again a lot of chemicals burning, maybe 5,000 tons of chemicals. Al-Qaqa explosive production complex, a huge one, 20 to 20 kilometers, a lot of air pollution coming from this area. Or Al-Tuwaita nuclear facility, which has been mostly in the media and in the press when people saw these nice yellow barrels, even with this good black painting on it, and they were thinking these are exactly the barrels they want for the water, to keep their water on. So they emptied the radioactive waste and took the barrels and used them in the houses. And now it's been very difficult to get the barrels back, and people don't realize the risk. And of course, the Mesopotamian masses, the unique lifestyle of the Arabs there. This is a picture from the 60s. This is how it looked that time. Then Saddam Hussein channeled the water away from the area, and only now the reflooding is going on. And we have been trying to work not only with the Iraqis, but also now with the Iranians on the protection of Mesopotamian marshes. Actually, this is a picture taken 1 week ago. First time for 29 years, the Iranians and Iraqis met, and we were able to facilitate this meeting in Geneva. 10 people from Tehran, 8 people from Baghdad came to that meeting in Geneva, starting first time in 29 years the discussions how to manage the common water resources on the both sides of the border. And they agreed next time to meet in October in Tehran, and after that in Baghdad. And where we were pushing them smoothly was, of course, that they might consider of establishing a protection area between the countries, probably a UNESCO World Heritage Site, Natural Heritage Site, maybe Ramsar wetland protection site or something like that. So there are these kind of tools that can be used. So what we can do is facilitate the process, explaining how these tools can be used, what are the financing requirements, how much international support is available if you go this and this way. But of course they have to make the decisions. But it was, I wasn't expecting so much of this meeting. And even after the meeting, we didn't put out any press release or anything, but both sides agreed, well, this was a meeting that they are happy to let UNEP to give information out if anyone is interested and so on. So they are not hiding the results. They think this was a very good start in that process. Our next steps, we are doing the capacity building. We have now actually 2-3 weeks ago, we had in Geneva 20 laboratory people from Baghdad. We have had in Amman the Iraqi experts. This is now the way how UN is, unfortunately, working for the security reasons outside of the country, in Jordan, in Geneva, and so on. We are collecting the database, which is fully used now by the Iraqi administration, and we continue the monitoring system with the satellite analysis and so on. We are also trying to catalyze the environmental aid to Iraq, and the latest decision has now been made by the Japanese government to release $14.5 million US for the environmental purposes. Decision was made 1 week ago for Iraq. Very good news. And of course, we are still planning our own mission to the region, to the country, whenever security-wise it's possible. We regretted a little bit to the Iraqis when we met them. We said that we are quite sorry that we cannot join you to the missions inside the country due to the security limitations. And then the Iraqis said to us, well, you don't have to be sorry because even we don't get access in the current circumstances. Our environmental experts has been sometimes captured by military police and so on when they have entered to some of these places. So even they feel it's still unsecure to make some of this environmental sampling or field work. And then we have been criticizing, of course, earlier that we didn't do work in Africa, but now we are doing it. We started our activities in Liberia in last December. We had 2 UNEP missions there. I liked actually very much when I visited Monrovia last time. There was the World Food Programme representative, and you know, World Food Programme is sending immediate food aid to any country that is suffering and cannot feed its population. And the guy said, you know, this is the country where you absolutely shouldn't have the need to send any food. This is fertile area. Half of the year is raining. They have only 3 million people living here. They have a lot of territory. There are many, many countries in the world where the natural conditions are not this favorable as in Liberia. But unfortunately, again, the conflict has resulted to this situation. 14 years of civil war. You see the child soldiers, almost 40% of the army were under 18 years old children, and the population had to move under the war. There are internally displaced persons who have been moving 7 times during these years, from place to another. This was the flow of people during the latest conflict. The capital Monrovia, where all the systems, like the sewage system and water system, has been planned for 130,000 people, is now having 800,000 inhabitants. People are looking for the safe haven in the cities. They are using the charcoal currently for the energy purposes. There is a lack of electricity. This is actually destroying now the last mangrove forest, their coastal area, causing new erosion problems. They have a lot of illegal cutting of the forest for this lack of power. And anyhow, it's one of those largest remaining portion of the Upper Guinean forest that is in Liberia. But it looks nowadays like that. They have the shifting cultivation practices, the slash and burn. It was maybe good 100 years ago, when people didn't move around as refugees, and where there were no roads and so on. But nowadays, this is a catastrophe that the slash and burn cultivation is destroying very rapidly part of the forests. And another part of the forest is destroyed by the illegal logging roads. And when you have an illegal road, it's not used only for these logging purposes, but also for bushmeat hunters, also for people who are arriving for slash and burn cultivation and so on. So road is, the evil in this kind of situation. And you have still the alluvial mining practices. When we asked from the Ministry of Mineral Resources, do they know about where are the mining ongoing, who has given the permits and so on, they don't know about these practices. The country doesn't benefit from the business that is going on, both in the forest and on the mining sector currently. We are doing the fundraising, we are making the capacity building for the Environmental Protection Agency. We try to get, again, environment as an integrated part of reconstruction. We look things from the transboundary, regional perspective, Sierra Leone, Guinea, there are many. Also countries that has suffered from the conflict, Cote d'Ivoire. We are promising to the government specific environmental assessments wherever they need them, and we are supporting the peacekeeping operation. Again, the soldiers are quite interested in what kind of circumstances they are working, how is it safe to work in those places. Then, Mr. Chairman, coming to the end of this presentation, what are the lessons learned from our post-conflict activities? We have been working since summer '99, starting from the Balkans. It has been an uphill battle, I have to say, to convince different stakeholders and donors that environment is something that you should address immediately. We always, as environmentalists, we always get the answer, you are environmentalists, so please come a little bit later, we are busy now. We are dealing with the humanitarian issues, we are dealing with the reconstruction issues, then it's time for the environment. And we are always insisting, no, we want to be there among the first ones, because otherwise you don't take into consideration the environmental issues. But as said, it has been an uphill battle. Environment has anyhow been recognized as a humanitarian issue in some of these cases. For example, when the safe return of the refugees in Afghanistan or in Kosovo has been taken, environment then has been taken into consideration when we say, please look that the areas where people are returning are safe. Then somebody is listening us, and be more careful. And we have been part of these humanitarian appeals for Kosovo, Afghanistan, Iraq. What kind of arguments we are using for our work? We always say it's important to minimize the environmental and health risks to the population. We always link environment and health very closely together. If these are not taken care of, environmental risks can cause long-term problems in these societies. Then more political argumentation, environmental diplomacy can be used for confidence peace building, whether it's relationship between Afghanistan and Iran on the Sistan wetlands, whether it's question about the Mesopotamian marshes and the Tigris-Euphrates rivers between Iran and Iraq, or the question between Palestine and Israel, or the question with Liberia and its neighbors in this post-conflict situation. Actually, sometimes maybe the environment can be the breaking the first ice and the first issue to be discussed in these circumstances. And we have got quite interesting response. I mentioned the Iran-Iraq meeting to you. And of course, this is maybe wishful thinking, somebody might say, but we think that paying attention to environmental damage can in the future prevent conflicts or make them less harmful to the environment. Why I'm saying this? I'm actually having more and more military audience. I'm now a frequent lecturer in the NATO school in Oberammergau in Germany, where actually there's a gathering of NATO environmental experts from all NATO countries. It's quite a good audience. Sometimes they ask, are you speaking about the green wars? Are you speaking about greening of the warfare? I of course say, well, I wouldn't like to have any wars, but please, whatever military activities you have to also take care of the environmental part of it, not only in the time of the peace, but also in the time of war. We have been putting all our reports in a site which is called without www, just postconflict.unep.ch, which is for Switzerland. So any of these reports can be downloaded, or any our other information can be downloaded from there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pekka. That was really a tour to horizon that gives us a very good sense of what you're doing, and we'll encourage people to pick up the reports outside to get the additional details. We have some time for questions. We have microphones that I ask that you use, and let us know who you are and where you're coming from, and pose your question. So the floor is open. Down here, Ken.
Ken Conca from the University of Maryland. You said at the beginning your third item in your list was environmental governance. Could you make a link between some of the shorter term and immediate kind of interventions and the longer term questions of institution building and capacity building, and just what are some of the high points of those steps in that sort of transition?
Yeah, we try to always, it's actually the biggest danger maybe in this kind of post-conflict country is that you try to replace the local government or the local authority. You always, of course, feel that, well, we know this better maybe, or we have been here before, or we have been in this kind of situations before, so we know how you should act. But before you say that, you really have to think, okay, in the future we are not here, and these people have to react to similar situations maybe by themselves. So why don't we go a little bit the slower way, let them room to make their own decisions, let them room to put their own priorities when what comes to the action, and also always follow the national legislation. This is a lesson learned from our Balkans activities. There were some governments who helped some countries of the region just putting up something very rapidly, and then they were accused afterwards that this what you didn't follow our national legislation. We have a certain norms, or we have certain rules. What we are doing always in UNEP, we say, okay, we help you, but you have to advise us how to make it according your own rules and criteria legislation. So it starts quite from the beginning, this dialogue. So we think that integrating the local expertise to these processes as early as possible is then strengthening their own capacities to handle it. But in some of these cases which are highly politicized, like the issue of depleted uranium or the issue of Kosovo conflict generally, where the Serbs were speaking about this ecocide or whatever they call it, that this is damage made by purpose to the nature, that this was the purpose of the NATO bombings. Then it came so politicized that we decided to keep out the Serbian experts from our team. And it was good or bad decision, but anyhow we could do independent work and published it independently, and so to say who is right, who is wrong in this and that case. But the other conflicts where we have been working, let's say in Afghanistan, Liberia, haven't had that element in it. But Serbia was more difficult because still the Milosevic government was in power. They had totally another view what has happened. They published their own reports which were I would say maybe we're not 100% correct, to say it nicely, and so on. So we had to challenge a little bit also their information.
Okay, Judy, in the back.
Oglethorpe from the World Wildlife Fund and formerly in the Biodiversity Support Programme. A few years ago we did a project looking at the impacts of armed conflict in Africa and mitigating the impacts, funded actually by USAID, Tim Resch, who's sitting over here. And it's been fascinating for me listening to your presentation because we're almost dealing with complementary issues to yours. You were dealing with a lot of brown issues, a lot of pollution. We were dealing with a lot of natural resource issues. And there's some very similar things, but also some big differences. But a couple of points that I'm delighted to see that you are now working in Africa, and I think if you continue this, you'll probably get into a lot more natural resource issues doing that. A couple of points. So one that we found on the natural resource side was that the transition times were really critical. That was when the natural resources really, really got hit, when there was no one authority in power, and there was a lot of anarchy. And one of our recommendations was really to try to work with whatever authority was there to try and very quickly come in and control resources again. You know, whether it's local communities controlling their wildlife and forest resources, or whether it's the government wildlife department helping it to build capacity to get up to speed again. The other thing where I think we do have something in common, but you didn't mention very much, one of the things that we found is often when a country's been through a war, especially if there's a new regime, there are fantastic new policy opportunities. The country, you know, is rebuilding, reconstructing, drawing up new policies. And quite often this is a great time for new environmental policies as well. You know, old problems may have got swept aside, and it may be really good that new policies can be created. And I was wondering if you had found this and had been able to, for example, bring in better environmental standards or so on, and if you stay long enough to see those policies changes through. Thanks.
Thanks. Maybe to start with the last part of your comment. Yes, we are trying to convince the governments that they should adopt the highest environmental criteria, they should have the most modern environmental legislation and others. But of course we are in this post-conflict situation entering the whole political game, who is who and what is the power of the ministries and others. So we also try to be a little bit cautious not to get involved, so to say, in the local politics too much. We try to support the ministries of environment, we try to support these ministers, sometimes as a persons even mentioning, but there is some limit where because you are not the government of the country, and this is where Afghanistan, we are quite close to these processes, but we also see, so to say, the risk. We don't want to give an impression that UNEP is always there or we are always available and so on. Really that we are the facilitating agency, but they have to make the decisions. We cannot make them but our recommendations go to this direction very much. Also not only the criteria but also environmental policies, which you mentioned, is very important, and I fully agree with you. Then about these African issues and natural resources, I think we have been moving really also, like in the presentation, from the urban or industrial countries also now to the countries which are totally depending on the natural resources. And also we are, of course, when we are in Africa, I have to be very honest, we are first time facing these societies where the corruption has been a long time problem, also corruption linked to the natural resources. And we see it very clearly in Liberia, that even the new government is coping with the very similar problems than the earlier ones. And when you start to get aid, it's when they ask you new mopeds and new computers, you come a little bit suspicious because you asked how many mopeds you got in the earlier times. You know, it's this kind of unfortunate. The history of the country is very sad from that point of view. But I fully agree that this post-conflict momentum is a very unique opportunity to create something new, because the new government usually is on place.
Sir, down front.
My name is Dan Fahey, and my question is about your work with the Balkans Task Force. And looking back now 5 years after you created the Balkans Task Force, how would you measure the success of your early work? And aside from, you mentioned that you closed your office down recently, and so that perhaps some contaminated sites were cleaned up, but how would you assess the capacity building that you did within that country, and is it leading to, say, less pollution from industrial sites or other positive effects that you can point to?
Well, generally speaking, I think we made this kind of end report, and the end report results were shared with the Serbian government, and they gave their comments, and know that we've really formally finalized it and got their feedback and others, and it was quite positive from the government side. Anyhow, I know that there could have been more these cleanup activities. We only took the really, really polluted sites, but of course there were many others, and people were complaining that our United Nations is working only in this and that town, but they are not working in our town. And of course the national government didn't have resources to go to each and every of these places. Secondly, there are stakeholders. If you go to the Pančevo, I'm afraid you still find a situation that factories and the municipal authorities don't cooperate. And even if UNEP tried to, we were in between. we try to get them to cooperate because said this is, the advantage of all of you. Just an example. When you make a cleanup of polluted soil, you have to put the polluted soil somewhere. The municipality made a decision not in our municipality, so not in our backyard. It wasn't easy to find another place where to put the polluted soil. So we were ready to do the cleanup, but we were in the middle of this kind of turf battle where to put properly store the waste. Of course, it's very, very advanced technology how you make the storages, but anyhow they didn't want them, and so on. So we were also criticized. We were either on the other side or on the other side. So we were quite deep in that local politics, so to say, in this cleanup activities. But generally, I would say that the activities in Serbia were good ones. In Albania, Macedonia, we were able to find donors to work for some of these projects. Kosovo still remains a country which is some kind of UN protectorate, as you know. UNMIC is still there, and so on. And it remains to be seen how effective own environmental administration they will get in the future, and how much this kind of UN protection or international protection they will need in the future.
Karen, and then the gentleman in the middle.
Hi, I'm Karen Klobnikin, and I work for research in the U.S. Forest Service on environmental security. I'm probably the lone ecologist who's really butting my heads on these particular issues, because I always get questioned, what are you doing looking at security? And it's a hard thing to be doing. Among the many things that I've been paying attention to recently, I follow the developments in the CCMS for NATO, and some of the recent discussions, and I know Jeff is familiar with the piece they did on trying to do predictive scenarios around environmental security. They've been talking a lot about environmental security as I understand it as an ecologist, but I'm wondering to what degree is there a prospect that as NATO retools and changes itself around, if this is likely or seems to be becoming a piece of NATO's mission to really pay attention, not just as the officers might to toxics and things like that, but to larger issues of environment, maybe in a predictive or, I don't know what else to call it, fashion, because the Europeans are putting up a satellite that are going to monitor conflict and environment, which is amazing. I mean, it's the most amazing thing. If you haven't seen their plan, it's just been put on the web in the last 2 months. So that's one question. The other question is, I have lots of questions, but I guess I can't ask them all, is that I always get spent uranium and reprocessed uranium mixed up. Which one's the dirtier one? One of them's dirtier than the other. There were reports of those being dropped in national parks in the region, and certainly even though the major pollution of the Danube River is not from the war, nevertheless that stuff's going down the drainage of the Danube. You know, it only takes a little bit of uranium to mess you up. And I'm wondering what's being done about sort of the dispersal of uranium throughout the watershed, and then also is there any post-assessment, post-conflict assessment of damages to biodiversity, for instance, loss of rare species or any of that kind of stuff? You know, the former Yugoslavia was a center of biodiversity for the region. So maybe I'll cram one more in. One more in is that the Soviets dumped terrible toxics, terrible defoliants all over Afghanistan. And is that something you've been addressing? Okay, that's it.
Okay. I try to answer briefly. First, about this NATO's role in the environment and conflict agenda. I can see that there is clearly now more interest in NATO as an organization. And what is very clear is that there are several member states that are now concentrating to these topics. I just met with the Swedish Army people. They have a research institute to work on these topics. Netherlands is extremely interested on these issues and so on. So this process is going on in NATO member states and NATO as such. One of these initiatives I didn't mention here, but I always should, because UNEP is part of that. There is for the Central Asia and Caucasus, this kind of actually UNEP, OSCE, so the European Security Organization, NATO initiative to look this kind of environment and security from the conflict prevention point of view. And they do quite fascinating this kind of exercises. For example, they take two neighboring countries and they ask both of them to draw maps that what do you feel as the biggest environmental threats coming from the other side of the border. And on the other side of the border they make similar maps and then they meet and then they look how they feel the threats over the border between these countries looking from the environmental point of view. And then they try to do something for these threats and others. So if this is part of the conflict prevention, I think it's a very interesting way to go on. So these are positive developments. About the depleted uranium issue, and first you asked about what is more dangerous than others. You have the natural uranium, which is everywhere and in the soil. When you measure uranium, you always find the natural uranium. It's in our soil or in our ground always. Then you have the enrichment process, where you can make the nuclear fuel for nuclear power plants or enrich for the weapon purposes and so on. And then the depleted uranium is the less radioactive. Actually, it's the what is left. Why it's used? It's because it's very cheap, because it's this kind of waste product of this enrichment process. And it's very heavy, dense metal that can be used, which is very low radioactivity, but anyhow, it's slightly radioactive. And when it's put to these places, which you mentioned, that it can cause something, I'm not so concerned about the rivers or lakes or seas, because it's the amount is not enough to pull out this. But some of the wells, if areas are very heavily targeted, the drinking water sources can be contaminated. Of course, it should be mentioned that the levels are very, very low, but it's not a pleasant idea that you take this type of water and you use it and so on. About Afghanistan, about the toxic legacy of Russia, I think you are right. In Afghanistan, war and conflict was still ongoing in some of these areas which were also earlier in a heavy military use, or which were used as camps, or they were taking as a new camps. So we didn't actually enter. We decided in Afghanistan that we purely concentrate to the towns, villages where people live. We don't go to Tora Bora mountains. We don't go to the military camps. It's another challenge, but certainly quite a lot of environmental problems still remains in these areas. And we have indicated to the Afghan government that whenever they need our help, if they specify some area or region or some installation or whatever, we are ready to come. So we are decided that we are available for 2-3 years for them wherever these kind of concerns appear.
Okay, gentleman in the middle, and then we'll move to the sides. Yeah, so right here in the middle, please. Thanks. Okay.
Hello, I'm Tim Resch. Part of the analysis that Judy referenced, I'm with USAID and the Asia Near East Bureau now. Part of the analysis that Judy referenced that we supported was looking at protection of biodiversity before, during, and after conflict. And so that there were, in fact, we saw in the Balkans, people hardening resources, hiding or separating or diversifying, moving resources out. I think in hindsight, we wish we would have dealt a little bit better with looting during the invasion of Iraq, the retreat of the Iraq in the first Gulf War, and what do we call it, environmental sabotage, that it was something that, if you will, countries and or people who care about protecting the environment can deal with, in addition to the rehabilitative post-conflicts activities that make sense. So I was wondering what your unit or some parallel unit within UNEP is doing on mitigating environmental harm in places where conflict is possible. Nepal, Zimbabwe would come to mind, and dealing and how the international community can protect biodiversity or the environment during periods of conflict, and kind of the global coalition for protecting of the gorillas in the Rwanda conflicts would be an example where people recognized that this was a useful asset that needed to be protected, whoever won.
Well, I think you are really right in that, and we are a post-conflict unit, but of course we try to look a little bit to the conflict prevention side and even what can be done during the conflicts and whether it's industrial pollution risks or this type of sites or biodiversity, and I think you are right that a lot can be done before the conflicts, and to mitigate the risks and plan things properly and so on, and of course the main issue then is the whole conflict prevention issue. What could you do also on the environmental side to minimize the risk for the conflict and so on? And then this issue, what could be done during the conflicts? It's a very interesting issue because even we are working in countries like or areas like Palestine where the conflict is still ongoing, and we are making this longer term assessment, but we got calls on a daily basis that you should be here now and you should see what's going on, or you should make an assessment. There has some damage to the buildings, and if there were asbestos in those building materials, which by the way it's very used there and so on, and all this kind of, so it's never ending issue. And I don't know, actually it's a good question how to organize this kind of work. The gorilla issue in Rwanda is something I think is a good example that the international attention was paid quite a lot to that issue. There are these kind of approaches, but I really think that by sharing the information that we have got from the post-conflict situations, what actually was the damage and what was mostly causing the damage and so on, maybe then is feeding back to how to prevent the damage and so on, and how to maybe protect people during the conflicts. As I said, in Serbia, actually, the authorities did a lot to protect the civil population. I really have to say that I respect their activities, because they even evacuated people who were under the smoke clouds and so on. So they made this kind of systematic civil protection action during the conflict. And I think this is, of course, what all organized societies should do, but unfortunately in some other conflicts we haven't seen that, and people are under these environmental threats.
Okay, gentleman down front, and then Christos, then we'll move to the back.
I'm Ian Fitzsimmons with the Institute of International Education. When you speak in this auditorium about the environmental theme, you've got a pretty sympathetic audience. It seems likely that in the performance of your duties, though, you encounter a broad variety of audiences, many of whom may be skeptical, downright hostile, and the most interested of which in any event will be wrestling with a whole range of public administration issues, trying to find the right priorities for each one. I'm curious if you can talk briefly about your experience and what ways of talking about environmental issues and speaking to that variety of audiences, what ways you found most effective, what ways most persuasive, most compelling, and most useful to the audiences you've spoken to, and helping them to understand what are the underlying issues, how do they rank them against the other issues they're working with.
Well, that's a good question, and first, of course, I have to mention that we are not only learning from environment every day, but we are learning from different cultures every day when we are working from these different parts of the world. And of course, if you go to Afghanistan, you don't ask how can I help you here in Afghanistan, because they don't accept any help. It's they are proud people, and they think they can manage. They are educated people, and they can manage their own country. And if they didn't invite you specially there, so you should go home, and you shouldn't push yourself on there. But if you ask help from them, if you say that we are from UNEP and we need your help to make this kind of proper environmentalism, they consider if they can give their help for you to do your work. So I'm always, I have to say, I'm learning all the time new things, and in these countries, and that the reactions from the stakeholders and governments are so different in different parts of the world. In some places we are immediately welcomed, in some others not. About this key message to different audiences, and how to get some seriousness in the environmental talks, I think the what we use quite a lot is this health issue and linkage between environment and health. Because all decision makers in whatever government, if they say that, you know, there is a concern that if you don't take action now, some people will get ill and they will come back to you that you didn't do anything for this and this. So this is quite, so to say, a good argument if it can be used. Of course, we don't use it if we don't have that kind of information. The second issue is maybe, if that was the stick, then the carrot is the possibility to get international help or international assistance on the environmental sector. We explain usually how, for example, the international conventions work, that if you join this and this biodiversity convention, you will be then able to get money from the Global Environment Fund, or you will be supported by UN system in this and this way, or you will be part of the regional cooperation and you will get some benefits from that. And so then when you can prove that environment is not only a cost, an additional cost, but also that there are proper funds for environment. And then finally, if you can say to the decision makers, we have some donors who we know that are interested. If you take now the first decision on that route, they might make their decisions to help you. And I think that is the strongest message we can bring to any government. Let's say in Liberia, 1 month ago, I met with the Chairman Bryant, who is the head of the interim government, and I told him that I have some talks with the donor community, and there are donors who certainly are now interested on your performance on the protection of the forest resources and others, but they are also ready to help you if you take these and these steps. He was extremely interested in that, and he was grateful that somebody is, so to say, running together this donor community also on the for environmental purposes.
Christos, and then I think we had some questions in the back.
I'm Christos Kiro from the University of Maryland, and I'm interested in the environmental peacemaking aspects of your work. You mentioned already a few cases, Iranians working with Iraqis, Israelis with Palestinians. How far would you consider from actually integrating the potential for collaboration and of environmental peacemaking to be included with the rest of the recommendations that are coming out of your assessments after a systematic research, just as much as for water and for health issues, to identify, describe, propose, and maybe in the future consolidate these structures that can facilitate long-term environmental peacemaking?
Well, I think it's very important sector, and I would love to be very, very enthusiastic what could be achieved on this sector. On the other hand, for example, when we had the Iranian and Iraqi delegations in Geneva, there was a question that why didn't you invite Turkey and Syria, because they are living upstream, and it was a very difficult question to answer, but deep in my heart I was feeling that if we are too ambitious, if we invite, instead of 2 countries, if we invite 4 countries, and especially 4 countries that maybe don't share currently the common view of use of the water resources, it will be a no-go situation. And of course, it's, so to say, it's easy to write to the report that when you want to have a sustainable management of the Mesopotamian marshes or on Euphrates-Tigris area, you have to get these countries involved. But it's another step to really get them around the table. And I think this is what is maybe my just feeling, that you have to be quite modest and you cannot get the moon from the sky, but you can start with something that is realistic and maybe it grows to something more serious and better. And maybe, let's say now taking these Mesopotamian marshes, if there is a day when Iranian and Iraqi governments have a common view how to protect the cross-border area, and they have a common plan, and then they need the help of Turkey or Syria to fulfill their goal, maybe it's easier for them together then, okay, can you join us to this? But to start from the zero, these talks, I think this will end to the zero.
Right, Ted in the back, and then the lady.
just commenting on the Middle East, Ted Beckett from Center for Environmental Diplomacy. Your document on the death study for the West Bank area is an incredible document, and it could be called a roadmap to environmental sanity in the region. And we really, really appreciated that that wonderful piece of literature. And I just wondered if you would had a few stories on that, on how that came to pass, and the other thing is how readable it is for a non-scientific person like myself. It's just a beautiful thing.
Well, thank you, Dayton. I appreciate this what you expressed, because I know that you are specifically also concentrating to that region and area. And I mentioned already you, but you are the famous man because you were referred both in the Israel ministry and the Palestinian ministry, and there are not so many people who have acceptance and appreciation on the both sides. So you are yourself doing a good job there. I think it was really. When we started this work, we had, on the both sides, quite suspicious audience. The Palestinians, their approach, of course, and I would say that legally maybe they were correct. They said that, well, you are the UN. UN has made a lot of resolutions to support the Palestinians. You know what is the UN position. You should follow exactly that track, and in the whole your report should be written on the basis of the earlier UN resolutions, including, the 1967 borders and whatever. And of course, when we went to the Israeli side, without naming anyone, so the feeling was that we have never got anything good for UN, and it would be a miracle if you could produce anything useful for us. We have so many disappointments from UN side. And this was our beginning. So I felt a little bit that this was a really mission impossible in many ways. But we just, did it. This kind of low profile, you don't try to be a besserwisser, you listen people. And then of course, the very critical moment was that when you inform the other side that you will also meet with the other, so they come very suspicious. They said, aha, the whole agenda is then put by Israelis, or the whole agenda is put by the Palestinians. So you are just running for their case. And to get this confidence that you have your own agenda and you are independent to do it, and you are not making a special favor to any one of the any side in this conflict. And as I think Foreign Minister Joschka Fischer said in some of the famous German Green meetings when people took up this issue, he said that you shouldn't show your solidarity to this or that side. You should show your solidarity to the peace process, and you should be the only way is to show your solidarity to the process that can lead to somewhere. And I think this has been our approach, that we have been quite tough as well. We said, okay, we know that you are crying for this and these issues. We have heard it many times, but it's again a no-go if we try to follow your way. Let's try to find the minimum issues where we can find some common ground. And but as anyone, I think, who has been involved in any peace talks knows, it's very difficult. We have also keeping this separate from the official roadmap. We were in the very beginning, of course, we also ourselves analyzed, should we be part of the, this official roadmap by the Quartet and others. And then we were thinking, well, first of all, it's really the table of the big guys, and we are small guys. So if these guys are talking, they always forget, of course, the environment. So it's maybe better to be independent. And secondly, of course, was that we never know what will happen to the roadmap plan. If it fails, or if it stops, or if it gets freezed for some reason, we don't want the environment to be part of that in that way. And of course, in these circumstances where the conflict is still ongoing, we are able to do our small thing, and we are happy about that.
Lady here, and then we'll come down to the gentleman.
Thanks. I have a question about the Oh, Ann Kiefer. The extent to which you're involved in developing indigenous capabilities for dealing with some of these problems, you've touched on it a fair amount in fairly broad terms, but it seems to me that your UNEP comes in and they make the assessments, they make the reports, they make the recommendations. I'm curious as to whether you're also involved in training the indigenous scientists or community to actually implement the solutions that you carry out, or whether it's still dependent on an international, essentially an international technocratic elite to come in and solve problems instead of the local communities.
Since I have a background in the NGO community and in the Greens and wherever, so I'm always when I'm going to these kind of situations, I always try to find the local communities and local NGOs that are working on these topics. And actually in Liberia, we had extremely good meetings, 2 extremely good meetings with more than 30 NGOs who have been during this conflict and times working on these issues. And they were, for example, indigenous groups who were extremely concerned about this illegal bushmeat business and other, which is going on, and illegal timber trade and cutting and logging. And we really felt that actually the indigenous people are the biggest supporter of the sustainable development in these countries. And now, regarding the Liberia especially, we have a plan to get them involved in the training. And for example, when the Environmental Protection Agency said that they need computers or they need equipment, we said that what about opening some kind of environment resource center also for the non-governmental organizations. So maybe a computer room which anyone can visit, maybe a library, anyone can link to the information, and especially thinking of these people who were complaining from the indigenous communities that they don't have access to information in these kind of circumstances. So we are trying to go that route. Just one example, of course, are the mass Arabs in Iraq, because they don't recognize any government, so to say. They are people who don't recognize any government, and they are very proud of their history. They are also very proud that they have a history of giving protection to anyone who is asking for protection. That's part of their culture. And that was also the reason why Saddam Hussein hated the culture so much, because they gave, of course, protection maybe to the ordinary criminals, but also to political opposition people during the Saddam times. So they were punished for that reason. But there are also people, when you, for example, try to make the census or whatever, they don't tell how many members they have in their families. They don't trust anyone. And when you try to come there and say we are from the UN and we try to help you and others, they are extremely suspicious. They said they have seen so many people coming and going, they have seen so many disappointments and others. So working with the indigenous communities is quite a challenge. And there we try to use that kind of roots that exist. For example, if there are good NGOs who already have established proper links to these communities, then try to use these ways to help the local communities.
Gentleman down front. I'll get you the microphone here, sir.
Mike, yes.
Yeah, my question's a simple one. You mentioned your interest in Africa now, sort of refocusing a little bit. Have you been looking at Sudan, and if so, could you talk about that?
Yeah, I was waiting the question that what are your next countries, and of course I have to mention that we have now one person in Haiti in a UN mission which is looking the needs in Haiti, and it might be that sooner or later we will be there. That remains to be seen. But in Sudan, yes, we have been looking Sudan for a long time now. What could be done for the environment? What are the specific needs? How to get access to different sites? And of course, the human tragedy and the conflict is still ongoing. We all know that. At the same time, we really look that the peace process could bring the result that international community could enter to the reconstruction phase in Sudan, and certainly then UNEP will be part of the UN activities in Sudan. We are fully integrated with the humanitarian people in UN on this, and I think it's very likely if the peace process will come as a reality, or peace will come a reality, it will be our next country in Africa. When we started our work in Liberia, it wasn't maybe a surprise. We got requests from 8 African countries to come. It was Rwanda, it was Angola, it was Ethiopia, you know. So there's a long list of countries now requesting this type of help. And of course, we have quite limited resources. We cannot handle many countries at the same time, so to say, because there is this political side and the environmental side, and we have to take care that everything is in a proper order. But we try to have more activities in Africa.
Great. Well, I would love to just thank you then, Pekka, for a terrific, really. We don't usually get such good substantive presentations on such wide-ranging topics, so it's really a tribute. They obviously have the right person chairing this effort to go to all these places in the world and do these, as you say, difficult diplomatic as well as environmental assessments and challenges. So won't you all join me in thanking Pekka for today's presentation. And be sure to pick up copies of the reports. I know he doesn't want to carry them all home.
They are too heavy.
Terrific. That really was wonderful. Thank you so much.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Very substantive. That's just terrific.
Oh, good to see you. Good. Ah, okay. Okay. Very good. Okay. Yeah. Very. Okay. Very good. Very good. Well, nice to have you here. Okay, thank you. I will come down because I don't want to stand on the... Yes. Yeah, it's actually, we have this web page, which is there, and of course, if you write to our address, we are based in Geneva, in Switzerland, so those contact addresses. Yeah, sorry, we have especially if I have your address or email or something, I will come back to you. Yeah. These technical issues, so maybe you can agree how to get approach this. Yeah. Okay.
And since I'm so happy with the last I used to be doing other aspects of stuff.
Okay.
Friend of mine, kind of a friend.
Yeah.
Right up her alley. And so if there were a way that I would see the slides.
There's a question how to get the slides to her.